Welcome to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARRL for beginner to intermediate ham radio licensees. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn about the many things the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. Welcome to the February 2026 episode. The January-February 2026 issue of On the Air went back to basics with an informative article about repeaters by Scott Freeberg, WA9WFA. Here to talk a bit more about what repeaters are, how they work, and how you can use them is QST technical editor Conrad Trautmann, N2YCH. Welcome, Conrad.
Thank you, Becky. Pleasure to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Many new hams get their first license, they get their first radio, which is often a 2-meter handheld, and then they ask, well, what's next? What can I do with this radio? And a lot of times the answer is, get on your local repeater and make some contacts, talk to some people on the repeater. So for the new hams, what exactly is a repeater? What does it do?
So Becky, a repeater is a device that is normally installed at a mountaintop or a high building, and it actually has a receiver in it, and it has a transmitter in it. And what it does is it receives a signal from somebody's 2-meter handheld, and then it retransmits that on a separate frequency at the exact same time that it's hearing it. So as I'm transmitting to the repeater has a receiver in it that's listening on frequency 1, and then it's basically resending that out on frequency 2. And the reason that it's on a high point is that it extends the range of my low power 5-watt or 8-watt handheld to be able to get to a much larger range.
Yeah, as we know, those little repeaters that come with your 2-meter handheld, they're called rubber ducks. They don't have a very big range. So if you want to get out there farther with, maybe your 5 or 10 watt handheld with that little rubber duck, you need something that has more power and an antenna with a broader reach.
Correct. And so the idea of putting it at the top of a mountain, I looked at the graphic in our On the Air article, and it actually is a good illustration of why you'd want it high, is because if you're on one side of the mountain and I'm on the other side, our handhelds won't be able to make a contact or a connection with each other, but I can see the top of the mountain and so can you. So by transmitting up to that high point, and having it repeat out, it does extend the range. And typically, the repeater will run about 100 watts. So that will cover, say a 20-mile radius, as opposed to us being able to communicate directly with each other through the handheld, which could be just a few miles.
So, and there are different kinds of repeaters, right? A lot of us think of repeaters as being something to use with your 2-meter handheld, but there are different kinds, right?
There are. So the handhelds can operate, frequently they're on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. So that's 146 megahertz and 440 megahertz. Some of them have a third band in it. There's a 220 megahertz band. But they also have different modes they can operate in. So they can be an analog handheld and an analog repeater, or they can be DMR, which is digital mobile radio. And then some of the manufacturers have support for other modes, digital modes similar to D-Star or System Fusion. So depending on which repeater you're trying to reach, you need a particular radio to get to work through that repeater.
So with there being different kinds of repeaters, some are analog, some are digital, you there are different radios that you can get into those repeaters with, right? Like if you have a DMR repeater near you, you're going to need a DMR radio to be able to use that repeater. You can't just use it with any old 2-meter handheld.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing about DMR is that the handheld radio that you get can support, usually it supports DMR repeaters, but it'll also support analog.
Oh.
So you'd be able to get into a local DMR repeater, say here in Connecticut we have the Aries network of DMR, but I can also switch to the analog repeater that's local to where I live using that same radio.
Oh, okay. I had my first experience with DMR last year and was really happy to say that I managed to like program the code plug, hit the repeater, talk to somebody on it. So it was quite an experience. So hams all over the country talk about the local repeater, my local repeater. So repeaters exist in a lot of different places. ARL has the ARL repeater directory that has listings of repeaters by city and state. And if you flip through this repeater directory, you can see that repeaters are just everywhere, all over the country. What uses might a ham have for their local repeater, or even repeaters, because there might be more than one that's local to them? And what might a ham who's traveling, maybe taking a road trip, what use might a ham have for repeaters that are local to them as they travel somewhere?
So local repeaters are typically operated by ham radio clubs. There are some that have individuals that run them, but in the majority of the cases, it's typically a club, and the club will use them to have all of the members of their club stay in contact with each other. So the ones that are, I mentioned the DMR one earlier, that is a linked repeater system, at least here in Connecticut, and that one, when you actually press the push-to-talk button on the handheld, it'll actually key up repeaters that are, or make all the repeaters in the state transmit. So it extends the range even further than the local repeater. It'll actually cover the entire state. But in majority of the cases, the local repeaters, usually a 2-meter or 70-centimeter repeater, is intended to allow the members of a club to stay in contact with each other. Here in Connecticut, we do have a network of analog repeaters that covers most of the state, and so as you're traveling or commuting, I commute, about 50 miles. I can hit 3 or 4 different repeaters that are all tied together that allow that handheld radio to communicate with anybody else in the state. So the other thing about the local repeater is that many times the club will have a weekly, what they call a net, where it's a predetermined time where all of the hams will get on the repeater. So in our case, it's a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. So we all get on at Tuesday night at 8. It's what they call a directed net, where there's somebody who acts as net control, and then that person calls for check-ins, and people will check in. And then there's usually a roundtable discussion where they'll ask for people's, what's the latest news, or if the club has news to disseminate, they'll disseminate it through the net. So, and it's also a way for hams to test their equipment, and for the repeater to be tested. So in the case of an emergency where the repeater is the only means of communication, if telecom is down or internet goes down, the repeaters typically are installed at places that have backup power or emergency power where you can continue to communicate.
Can you talk a little bit about how to set up your radio so that you can use a repeater?
Yes. So the very first thing to do is, you mentioned the ARRL repeater directory book. That is key because depending on the location you're in, and the type of repeater you're trying to reach and activate, the repeater directory has all the specific parameters in it that need to be programmed into the handheld radio. So repeaters operated by clubs or even individuals will have specific tones that are necessary in order to activate them. They'll have special frequency offsets and depending on the operator of the repeater, those offsets could be different from one another. So there's no standard program this in and it will work. You need to understand the parameters of the repeater that you're trying to get into. And the repeater directory is a great tool to figure out what repeaters are local to you that you could potentially get into. And then the specific parameters that need to be programmed in order to activate that repeater. Some repeaters are open, so if you just transmit, it'll retransmit you. Others are closed repeaters that have special, what they call a private line or CTCSS tones that are necessary in order for the repeater to activate. So if I didn't have that tone programmed in and I keyed up or pressed the transmit button on the radio, the repeater would ignore me. It's like, oh, I don't know that you're there, you know. But when it sees the special PL tone, then it says, oh, I see somebody coming in on that frequency. I'm going to retransmit it, and then that's what gets you the further range. So programming the radio, like I said, it's good to know what repeater you're trying to get into. A lot of times clubs that operate these repeaters will have on the club page the repeater parameters. But again, the ARRL repeater directory will include that as well.
Yeah, it's got all of it. Repeater tones, they can seem a little mysterious in just talking about them, but once you understand what they are and how they work, it's a pretty easy concept. And On the Air magazine has a few articles to help you out with that. In the March-April 2020 issue, there is an article called Tones, the Keys That Unlock Repeaters, that gets more into tones, how they work, and a little bit about how to program them. And the upcoming March-April 2026 issue will also have a piece about tones, so you should look for that. So once you have access to repeater, what hams sometimes call hitting the repeater, once you've managed to hit a repeater, then what do you do?
So a good place to start is to listen. And then I think that's always a good rule of thumb whenever you tune your radio into any frequency, is just to listen to see what's happening. As I mentioned, the clubs that typically would have that information posted on their site also have their schedule of their nets. So a really good thing to do to start is to just listen to a net to see the process and how it runs. And by doing that once or twice, then you would understand when the right time is to actually transmit and announce yourself. If there's not a net occurring at that time and you just want to test your handheld radio, you can push the transmit button, and most repeaters have a beep that will return back when it has successfully transmitted or retransmitted your signal. So you would transmit, announce your call sign, which is a requirement, and then let go of the transmit button, and you would hear it come back to you with a beep. Most of the local repeaters near here, if there's no traffic on the repeater at that time, you would just announce, this is November 2 Yankee Charlie Hotel, mobile and listening, and that would be enough to let everybody else know that you're on the channel. If there's somebody else there and they're willing to communicate, they will typically call your call sign and announce themselves. So, and then that can start a conversation, and I can tell you here on that commute that I do every day, that network of repeaters has people that commute in the mornings and the afternoons that will typically share traffic information or just what's going on in the area, and it's usually very good. What's the weather coming up, and
Yep.
so.
Yeah. And, it can be a little daunting to get into a repeater and then not hear anything going on. And that's the time that you may want to just, break the silence and key up and give your call sign and say, listening. There might be other people out there who are going, oh my gosh, there's nobody on the repeater. So sometimes you just need to take the chance and throw in your call sign, as they say, and tell people that you're there. You never know, somebody might come back to you.
The nets are a really great thing, and I can tell you here where we live that there's a net every night for something somewhere that you can join. So by using the repeater directory to figure out what repeaters you can hear, programming those into your handheld radio, and then listening, typically the nets are held after dinner, so 7 or 8 o'clock at night, you can dial around and you'll typically hear a net. And most all of those nets, with a few exceptions, will ask for anybody anywhere to check in. So that's your opportunity to just announce yourself and introduce yourself as a ham radio operator. Yeah. You mentioned earlier, what about people that travel? And if you know that you're going to be traveling somewhere that has a repeater system, program your radio in for those frequencies. And then when you're in town, so if I were to travel to California, for example, I could bring my handheld with me, program in some local frequencies in the city that I know I'll be in, and then when I'm ready to, I can announce myself there. And hams are very friendly. So it's a great way to introduce yourself and ask for advice on where to go, what to do, and if you have questions about the local area, hams will always chime in and give you that information. So it's a great way to make friends in other places as well.
Thanks again to Conrad Trautmann and to YCH for being here today. Thanks, Conrad.
Thank you.
And I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We will be back in March. But in the meantime, feel free to send comments to ota@arrl.org. And to learn about ARRL membership, visit arrl.org, our website. Until next time, I'm Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY 73.